Hi folks, welcome to 15 Minutes in the Forest. I'm Jennifer Gagnon with the Forest Landowner Education Program at Virginia Tech. I'd like to welcome you to my farm outside of Snowville, Virginia. And today I'm going to use the farm as a backdrop to discuss with you setting your management goals and your objectives. So first, let me give you a little background on the property, and this is the kind of information you'll want to have on hand when you start to work on setting your management goals. So this property is 70 acres. It's on the Little River, and the Little River is a tributary of the New River. The New River is one of the oldest rivers in North America and maybe even the world. The property was initially settled by the Simpkins Flincham families in the 1700s, and my husband and I purchased it in 2010. The property is located in the Ridge and Valley Province in Southwest Virginia, and the highest point is a cemetery that's at about 2,100 feet. About 2/3 of the property is leased to a local farmer. He manages and cuts the hay. In the late 1980s, 10 acres were planted into eastern white pine. And the remaining forested areas on the property are a mix of Appalachian hardwood species. They're between 40 and 70 years old. And the main species we have out here are black walnut, black cherry, there's a little bit of yellow poplar, and we don't have a whole lot of oak. The oaks that we do have out here are white oak, northern red oak, and some black. So when we bought the property, my husband and I are both foresters, and our oldest daughter is also a forester, and she lived out here while she was in college. So all of us had a lot of ideas of what we wanted to do with the property, and we needed to narrow down those ideas and prioritize them. So we went through an exercise to determine what our management goals would be. So let me talk to you a little bit about what management goals are. A goal is simply your vision for how you want your property to be in the future. It's a very broad statement of why you own your land and why you have your property. And goals are very important because they're going to determine what management actions you take on the ground. Goals are broad though. They don't have any specific timeline associated with them, nor do they have specific management activities associated with them. It's just a statement about how you want your land to look in the future. We use this family resource inventory worksheet to list the stakeholders in the land, what our management skills are, and how we each want to use the land. Compiling this information into one document allowed us to create 4 goals and an overarching vision statement. This worksheet is available on the Virginia Forest Landowner Education Program's website, which will be given at the end of this video. So goals tell us where we want to be, but they don't tell us anything about how we're going to get there. Objectives are what we use to help us achieve our goals. Objectives are actionable steps that we can take on our property. Objectives have timelines associated with them and actual things that you can do on your property. Now, unless you're a natural resources manager, you might not have a good idea of how to determine your objectives, what objectives you will need to help you achieve your goals. And this is where a natural resources professional can come in. They can take a look at your property, look at your goals. They can tell you if your goals are realistic or not. And then they can help you develop what those actionable steps are, what those objectives are. So to demonstrate some of this, I'm going to go through some of our goals that we set for our property and talk about the objectives we have in place to help us achieve those goals. So our first goal is creating and maintaining wildlife habitat. And to be honest, some days I really question the wisdom of this goal because we do have quite a bit of wildlife out here. And most of our interactions with the wildlife are conflict interactions. The wildlife make our dogs bark incessantly. They torment our chickens and they get into my garden and clip things back. We have electric fences around everything that we want to maintain out here. But still, overall, we really enjoy seeing wildlife. And as we get older, my husband and I have really gotten into watching birds. So we're doing little things on the property to help improve their habitat. So I'm standing in front of one of my projects, and this is my pollinator garden. So every year I've been slowly converting some of our grassy areas, particularly areas that are difficult to maintain through mowing, into native wildflower gardens. So it doesn't look like much right now. I've left all the debris from last year on the ground. It's the beginning of March right now. I'll clear it out towards the end of March. And that allows the pollinator garden to not only provide nectar and pollen in the summertime, but to provide cover, nesting spots, and some seeds for wildlife and pollinators throughout the winter. So things are starting to green up right now. In another week or two, there'll be enough green up available that I can clear out all of the brush. But this is a pretty easy and inexpensive way to improve wildlife habitat. You can also see behind me this newly cleared right-of-way. This was cleared last summer for the power lines, and really I could convert all of that to wildlife habitat, to pollinator gardens as well. That's going to be a much bigger, longer term project, but it's something I'm going to start working on this year. So creating pollinator gardens is our first objective towards achieving our goal of improving and maintaining wildlife habitat. Our second objective is creating an edible landscape. And this actually does two things. It helps us achieve our goal of creating wildlife habitat, but it also helps us achieve our goal of self-sufficiency. I'm standing in front of my favorite part of our entire property right now, our blueberry bushes. And to be honest, the blueberry bushes are really more for me than for wildlife, although I'm forced to share a little bit. But we also have peaches and apples, nectarines, serviceberry, blackberries, raspberries, all planted up here in the orchard. And of course, we share all of that with the wildlife. So the third objective we have towards meeting our wildlife habitat goal is to maintain this pond. So the dam for this pond had been cut when we purchased the property. We have since rebuilt the dam, and when the pond is dry, my husband takes his tractor and runs it along the bottom to try and compact the soil so it better holds water. I guess we've been fortunate the past 3 years or so. We've had unprecedented amounts of rain, and so the pond's been able to maintain water throughout most of the year. I was hoping the peepers would be singing today, but I think it's just a little bit too cold. They have been singing the last couple of days. The frog noise that comes out of this thing is incredible. We've also seen deer out here drinking from it in the morning, and of course my dogs like to swim in it as well. So the pond has been a nice addition to the property, and it's one of our main objectives to keep it going. Okay, well, let's move on and talk about our second goal, which is improving forest health. So one of our objectives to help us meet our forest health goal is to do something about this white pine stand I'm standing in. These white pine were planted in the late 1980s, so they're about 40 years old, and we are seeing a lot of mortality. And white pine can live to be much, much older than 40 years. And so there's something else going on here. And what's going on is that we have a gross close soil, which is a limestone soil, and white pine doesn't particularly care for limestone soils. So these trees did good for a while, but if you look behind me, you can see a lot of snapped off and on the ground white pine, and this stand is only going to continue to deteriorate. And so in the interest of forest health, this is one of the areas that we'd like to cut and convert to shortleaf pine. So shortleaf pine is a native species, and it's considered a diminished species, meaning that there used to be a lot more of it on the landscape than there is now. And so we would like to get this planted into shortleaf pine. It's also a beneficial species for wildlife, so it can help us meet that goal at the same time. So now I'm standing in one of our pockets of mixed Appalachian hardwoods on the property. And my husband has an objective of working on a timber stand improvement project here. And in this timber stand improvement project, he's going to be removing undesirable trees. So trees that are broken, diseased, species that we don't want, invasive species included in that. And this project will actually help us achieve 3 of our goals. So he's removing trees that we don't want to favor trees that we do want. So trees like oaks that will provide acorns for wildlife habitat. He's removing invasive species and diseased and damaged trees. So he's helping to improve forest health. And everything he's taking out of here is being used for firewood. So that's helping us achieve our goal of becoming self-sufficient. We can use the firewood to heat our home. So timber stand improvement can have a lot of benefits on a property. And it's also an example of how you can use one objective to help you achieve multiple goals. So our third management goal is to be self-sufficient. And one of our objectives to help us meet that goal is to grow as much food as we possibly can on the property. I love nothing more than fresh fruits and vegetables. And living 40 minutes outside of town, it just doesn't make any sense to get up early on a Saturday morning and drive into the local farmer's market. It is much more convenient to walk out into the yard and pick things from the garden. Of course, any of you who have actually had a garden know that it's not easier to do that. Gardens are a heck of a lot of work, but there are a lot of rewards that come with them. So we do have 2 productive gardens on the property, and we also have a greenhouse that we'll take a walk down to. Another aspect to our food production objective is our flock of hens. We currently have 14 hens, and we're getting 10 to 12 eggs a day. So we feel like we're being the test cases to ultimately determine whether or not eggs are good or bad for your cholesterol. We eat a lot of eggs. But the chickens are great for production, and they're also very charming little pets to have. So the second objective towards our goal of being self-sufficient is firewood production. And I mentioned that we get a lot of firewood out of the timber stand improvement project in our mixed hardwood stands. We also get firewood from trees that have fallen across our rivers, trees that are dying. So firewood is pretty easy to come by on this property, and it allows us to heat our home and be sufficient in that respect. So the last component of our food production objective for our self-sufficiency goal is this greenhouse. And this is really and truly one of my favorite places on the property to be. It allows me to start all of our garden vegetables earlier in the spring, and it allows us to have winter crops. So it's March, and right now I have spinach, lettuce, carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and bok choy, which does exceedingly well in a greenhouse, all growing so that we can have fresh vegetables all year. Now you may hear a fan running in the greenhouse, and this fan goes on once the internal temperature gets above 80. The fan and the lights in the greenhouse are operated off of a solar system. So that is the final objective towards our self-sufficiency goal, is to have as much solar out here as possible. So all of our outbuildings are wired with solar, including our wood shop. My husband can actually operate his saws and his planer off of solar. These 2 solar panels allow us to operate the fan that's running, as well as lights. We can plug in a small space heater to keep the greenhouse warm in the evenings, and we have an electric line run along the outside of the greenhouse to keep the critters out. It's really amazing how many things can get into the greenhouse to eat stuff that's growing in there. So all that operated off of solar. Our fourth management goal is creating a space where our family can spend time together and enjoy the property. And so our first objective towards meeting that goal is to create recreational opportunities on the property. And the number one recreational opportunity that we have is kayaking down the Little River. We have very easy access to the river, and this past summer my husband converted these barn stalls into shelving systems so we can keep all of our kayaks clean and up out of the ground, easy to put away. And well, not only do we have our own kayaks in here, we have our kids' kayaks, and we have our friends' kayaks in here as well. Now I'm up at our fire pit campsite area, and this is part of our objective to create recreational opportunities for our family. So in the summertime we have bonfires, we cook out up here, make s'mores, and my granddaughter and I went on her first camp out up here last summer. She enjoyed it. She was a little nervous because until that particular day, she thought that bears were just on TV. She didn't know they were real. So she was a little nervous, but we survived, and she's been asking me when it's going to be warm enough for us to camp out again this year. I think one thing that probably stands out to you is that a lot of our objectives don't have a specific timeline associated with them. A lot of our objectives are ongoing projects. Some years we may do more work than others towards a particular goal, and that's okay. Another thing I wanted to emphasize is be flexible with your goals. They don't have to be set in stone. So be open-minded, be willing to change your goals if your circumstances change or something on your property significantly changes. Goals can be flexible. Well, thank you for spending 15 minutes on the farm and in the forest with me today. And please be sure to join us next Friday at 12:15 for another edition of 15 Minutes in the Forest. Have a great weekend.